Hello and welcome to Indian Standard Time. I'm Siddharth Varadarajan. 72,000 Indian soldiers laid down their lives in World War I fighting what was essentially a war on behalf of the British Empire. Who were these soldiers? What motivated them to enlist in this war? What were the conditions that they confronted on the battlefield? Those who survived, how did the war alter their lives? Are questions which even 100 years on, most of us in India know very little about. Joining me to discuss the role of Indian soldiers in World War I, in particular on the Western Front, is Shrabani Basu, author of a riveting new account of the war and the Indian contribution to it for King and Another Country. Shrabani, thank you very much for joining us on IST. It's a real pleasure to have you. And it's an amazing book you've written.
Thank you.
What is it that got you interested in the history of World War I and in particular the role of Indian soldiers?
Well, I've always been interested in Indian soldiers and both the wars, actually, First World War and Second World War. I wrote a book about an Indian woman in the Second World War. That was a biography.
Noor Inayat, the spy princess.
The spy princess.
Right.
It was about Noor Inayat Khan, a secret agent in the Second World War. So that got me into the Second World War. But this time, with the centenary coming up, I knew that there was going to be a lot of books on the war. We're going to hear all about Ypres and Gallipoli and the Somme. And of course, I said, the Indians are going to be left out once again. Somebody's got to write about them. And I felt I had to. After all, 1.5 million Indians crossed these seas. They came to England, they came to the Western Front, they came to France, Flanders, they went to Mesopotamia. And we know nothing about them. We have their names carved on India Gate, and we don't even know what it's there for, you know.
I suspect most people who go to India Gate don't even know that this monument commemorates Indian dead
Exactly.
in World War I.
Well, in all honesty, when I grew up in India, I grew up in Delhi, I would go to India Gate for ice creams. That is what it was. And we were not aware that the image of World War I was always Tommies with the helmets and the war poets from England. And we had no idea that there were men in turbans in these very same trenches, fighting with their English counterparts, dying in these trenches, and their story's been forgotten. I can
understand why British historians would perhaps focus on their own and not focus on the Indians who died. Indian lack of interest could be put down perhaps to the fact that this was not our war.
Absolutely.
Governments, in fact, until Prime Minister Modi laid a wreath at Indian war graves in France during his last visit to France, I don't think the government of India was particularly keen to own up to or honor these war dead.
Exactly. They fell between both the countries. You see, what happened in India post-independence is the heroes, Indian heroes naturally, were those who fought for independence, those who went, to the news, hangman's news with songs, and that they were our new heroes. These men who had fought for their colonial masters did not matter anymore. The times had changed. And, their colonial masters forgot about them, and so did their own countrymen. So I went to this Indian memorial. It's the biggest Indian memorial in France. It's in Neuve-Chapelle, where 4,000 Indians died in just 3 days. And there wasn't anybody there. It was absolutely empty. There was one wreath, and it was so moving, standing there, surrounded by names of Indians, in a field in France. And it was absolutely surreal. I sort of write about it in the book. And that is what, you feel that it's so important to remember them. I think the greatest injustice we would do is just forget about them.
Even if we can't remember or honor them as heroes, because it wasn't a war that India fought by itself and for itself, but their victimhood in some way, their victims of circumstance could be certainly commemorated in a fitting way.
Absolutely. I mean, we have, the Australians and the New Zealanders, they have Anzac Day to remember their fallen dead. And we could remember them. These were brave men who went, they fought loyally. They were not, the war was not of their making. It was not their choice to go.
Right.
They were sent there. And they did their job. They got Victoria Crosses, 11 Victoria Crosses, Orders of Merit. They rescued, they died rescuing their English officers. In fact, there's so many stories, human stories from this war. They also came back with many things that they had learned from there. So it's not all negative.
Okay.
But the point is we can't forget them.
But tell me something about the factors that motivated Indians of that time to sign up and fight this war. They knew that they weren't fighting for India.
No.
They knew they weren't fighting for the national cause, and they were, in a way, signing up for a war at a time when there was considerable national ferment in India.
Of course.
Right? You had, well, Kartar Singh Saraba was hanged after the war started, but there were other young men who sacrificed their lives fighting the British. So what were the kind of choices, or what were the kind of factors that drove some of these young men that you've written about to enlist for the war?
Well, it was very clear. I mean, most of the recruitment is from the area of the martial races. So you have Sikhs, Pathans. That was the structure of the Indian army at that time. But apart from that, they recruited they were peasants. They were people who, the crops had failed. It's economic at the end of the day. I've spoken to these families. There was no choice. In some areas in the northwest, they said there is no other livelihood. We have to join the army. In places in Garhwal, they said there was a cholera in the area, and our sons had to go and join. 11 rupees, 1 uniform, 3 meals a day. They signed up.
Right.
That's what happened.
So I can understand poverty and economic circumstances impelling the vast majority of enlisted men, right? 1.5 million Indians mobilized. Clearly, there was a major socio or economic push,
of course,
propelling them to this war. But you also have individuals who volunteered when they didn't have economic reasons to do so. You write about Hardeep Singh Malik, student at Balliol College, Oxford. Tell us about him.
Well, these, the pilots are, of course, what I didn't know when I started was there were Indian pilots in the First World War. It was something I just didn't know. But of course, the pilots come from a different social class. These are young Indians who come from wealthy families, who've been sent abroad for education. So Hardeep Singh Malik, he's graduated from Balliol. He watches all his, all his batchmates, they go to the war. But he's not allowed. Why? Because he's Indian, and you cannot have an Indian as an officer. And he wanted to join the Air Force. And in the Air Force, they're all officers. So Hardeep Singh Malik's not going to give up. He's a dapper young Sikh, cricketing blue. And he goes off to France. He drives ambulances. And he nearly joins the French Air Force. And then they say, so his tutor in Oxford hears about it. And he's horrified. He says, he can't, we can't do this. The French are taking him and we are not. We are rejecting these bright Indians. So he's brought back, has an interview, joins the Air Force. And
so the rules, in a way, get changed in order to accommodate him in the
He opened the door. So then we had a second Indian pilot who is also amazing. He was just out of school. He lived in London. Indralal Roy, called Laddie Roy, another dapper young teenager who loved fast cars, loved sketching. And he joined. He couldn't wait. He joined the Air Force. It was then called the Royal Flying Corps, RFC. He joins up. He becomes India's first flying ace. He downs 10 aircraft at the age of 19. But it's very sad. So he dies. He dies. He's shot down. His plane goes over France. There's a dogfight. He goes down, taking down 2 German aircraft with him. And he's awarded the DFC, Distinguished Flying Cross, first Indian to win the DFC.
So these are young men obviously driven by the adventure and the excitement that air warfare, which is in its infancy, obviously had for them. But somebody like Hardeep Singh Malik, nevertheless, also had to grapple with. He probably knew Indian students in the UK who were saying, "What are you doing? There's another war that has to be fought." So how? I mean,
he writes about it actually. So it's in the book. He wrote his memoirs, and he said how confused he was for a while that there was another war that was our war. So whose side am I going to take? But then he decides, and his sense of adventure. I mean, he's young. He wants to go out there flying. So he says, no, at this time I'm going to support the Indian war effort. And let's not forget, even Mahatma Gandhi at this stage is in England, and he volunteers. He says, I'm going to round up volunteers from all the Indians present in the UK, and he shoots up a letter. By the time he's reached from South Africa, he's writing to them. So everybody is supporting the war. The Congress leadership back here is supporting the war. And their thinking is that we might get Dominion status afterwards. So that's the calculation.
By giving our contribution to the war effort.
Exactly.
So let's discuss some of the logistical difficulties that the British faced in mobilizing such a large force of Indians.
Of course.
What were the special provisions that you've written about that they had to make?
Well, once you take the Indian army, of course, you have a composite culture. You have Hindus, Muslims, different religions, different castes. And after the mutiny, the English are very careful that we're not going to, have anybody angry, no religious problems at all. So they take a lot of care. So now the Hindus are not going to have any food served by the Muslims. They're not going to have water served by them. Muslims won't eat Muslims won't eat pork, Hindus won't eat beef. So what you need is, they have an army of followers, the cooks, the cleaners, the water carriers, the kneaders of dough, somebody to make chapatis near the front line. All these people travel, these followers, they travel to the Western Front. And the way I see it is you have the Maharajas on one side, they're going there, sabers rattling, and you have the cooks and the cleaners on the other hand. And it's like a band of brothers. They are all going for this first Western war. It's an amazing thing. And the Germans look at them and say, why are the British bringing this army? And so initially they're really surprised, but then they themselves write that they are really good, tough warriors.
Right.
So
I want to come a little bit later to the shock and awe that obviously Indian combatants, Indian soldiers, and the cooks and cleaners who accompanied them, this vast retinue of service people, the kind of shock and awe that horror that they experienced in trench warfare. But before I get to that, I want to understand, and our viewers to understand a little bit about the kind of reception that Indian fighting forces, Indian soldiers encountered in the UK, in France, in Belgium. Were they seen through the same racialized prism that we know in the 20th century Indians and darker skinned immigrants in Europe were looked at and are looked at, or was it the fact that they were fighting this war a major factor in the way they were evaluated or seen?
It was very different. As the troops embarked in Marseille, the French lined the port. There were cries of "Les Hindus." They didn't know the difference. They thought everybody's a Hindu. "Les Hindus, Les Hindus." They screamed and they showered them with flowers.
I suppose in French, Hindu is the word they use for Indian. Yeah.
So then they wanted to embrace these Sikh soldiers. They were so exotic with their turbans. They gave them flowers. They wanted to kiss them. These Sikh soldiers, you can see their photographs. They're so embarrassed. They followed them to the camps. They watched them sit there, make chapati, dal. They say these Indians are very strong because they eat trees in the morning. And of course, they meant they eat, and they brush their teeth with the neem sticks.
Right.
So it was a totally different culture. And they are just fascinated by them. They used to come to the train stations, give them sweets, give them food to eat. So there's a very warm reception. And they said they've come to fight for us. So there is this feeling. Right. And some Indian soldiers write that anyone with a turban is a special guest.
Yeah. In fact, I want to show, for the benefit of our viewers, this absolutely fascinating photograph or a slide of an Indian soldier, a Sikh soldier, if the cameraman can just zoom in on this, a image of a Sikh soldier who was impressing.
Yes, a French lady.
Impressing a French lady with his very dapper attire. And this was, in a sense, the way in which the European population saw these soldiers.
Saw them, absolutely. Yeah. They were exotic. When they went to England, the injured soldiers were taken to England to recover in hospitals. Once again, there were crowds to see them. But the English were very clear. They didn't want white English women to go to the hospitals to meet them. They didn't want English nurses, white English nurses, to nurse them. So there's a very clear distinction that they did not want any intermingling.
Right.
And so segregation is
So segregation
place.
Even in the trenches?
Not in the trenches. Okay. In the trenches, they are all fighting together. Right. There is no, Hindus, Muslims, everybody's fighting together, and the English, the Tommies are all there.
Right.
They're eating, sleeping, and there are lots of accounts by British officers talking about the warmth of the Indians in the trenches. So I think in the trenches, it's the same feel. They're all dying there. And there is a bonhomie that develops there.
Now, tell us about what you found in the soldiers' own accounts of the horror that they confront in trench warfare. This is, of course, a period when there are no rules, particularly in the use of gas and large fatalities caused by these kinds of weapons. What record do the soldiers leave behind about that experience, that horrible experience?
It is absolutely. It's their first experience of trench warfare. They'd never seen anything like it. They'd had hand-to-hand combat in the Northwest. That's what they'd seen. So they give these accounts of, the sky is full of, it rains down, people are split apart. This is not a war, this is a Mahabharat. And the accounts are really moving. And of course, then we move by 1915. You have the first gas attack. And that is horrific. The Indians face it in the Second Battle of Ypres. There's no protection. They tie their turbans. They are told to tie their turbans around their faces. and put chloride of lime, and that's how they're facing German gas attack. And a second, a Victoria Cross is won by Mir Dast for his bravery in rescuing people. They are told to urinate on these turbans and tie them on your faces. And we have photographs of them standing in the trenches facing this.
Right, which of course provided no protection.
Absolutely not. So, they are out there. When they first reached, they didn't even have warm clothes. So these are the conditions they're working in. They went in their cotton khaki drill, and this is October. It is cold. By November, the snow has started. They still didn't have great coats. Many just froze. They ride on and on endlessly. We have not seen the sun. It rains day and night. It is cold. We are frozen. They stand in these trenches. The snow is up to their shoulders. Their feet are frozen. Many died of frostbite. Many just died in the cold.
And do the colonial records show at least some concern on the part of the British that we've sent all these men here without providing them with warm clothes, warm materials?
Absolutely.
What steps were taken then to address this kind of a problem?
Oh yes, there are letters that fly back and forth. There are reports. The English are very thorough about it. So there's a.
I suppose India Office versus MOD would be.
There was a war committee, and there is also a comfort committee to ensure that these soldiers are looked after. So everything that they need, apart from coats and blankets and everything, is things like comforts. So spices, ghee, dal, these neem sticks, Indian music to listen to when they're in hospital. Gaffar Jan's records are taken there and they want to listen to them. So every hockey sticks, chess, pachasi, there's a list of games that they want them to play. So among the comfort committees, these lists, you could see the concern. They are so concerned. There's this amusing story when the Punjabi soldiers, they don't like these boiled English sweets. So that's been brought to their notice. And there are meetings held that they want this sweet called the pinni, which is a very, full of ghee and, almonds and stuff. And they said, how do we get these pinnis to them? Meeting after meeting. So first they say, we'll source it in India. Pinnis arrive, doesn't work. Source it in England. Pinnis arrive, too expensive to source it in England. Shall we get a sweetmeat seller from India? And I had this vision of this man sitting there with a big kadai, 1 mile from the trenches, and he is frying and making Indian sweets. It is so bizarre. But this is also the first time that curries reach the front line.
Right.
They had to have these cooks who are running to provide them with hot curries. Many died in these trenches. They are buried there with just their single names. Hansa, cook.
Right.
Babu, cook.
Right.
There were young children as young as 10 who went there just as kneaders of dough, just to make atta and chapatis. Yeah. So
we know thanks to the censors, military censors, we have a rich treasure trove of letters that soldiers wrote back home.
Yes.
You've read, I'm sure, a large number of them. David Omisi published a number of them a few years ago.
Yes.
Apart from the usual horror stories, and I would imagine a lot of prosaic stuff as well about just everyday life.
Yes.
Were there any potential Wilfred Owens or Sigfrid Sassoons among those writers, or were they too preoccupied with?
No, there were. Well, I wouldn't say Wilfred Owen, but in their own way. They have these poetic descriptions. So the cows lie down like the month of Bhado. We have given up. So they're very rural references, which is what the soldiers feel.
Right.
And they write about it. We have given our lives like these cows, the oxen. Then they write about the rain, the skies. It's all references to, countering with their sort of environment that they grew up in. Right. So it is poetic in its own way. Right. It's very earnest, and it's their voice. So that is important.
And Indian prisoners of war taken by the Germans, do we have any information on whether they were subjected to discriminatory or differential treatment, particularly harsh treatment?
We have some where there were, there's some reports that they hanged some prisoners from a tree, which was, obviously not good. But they took them to Zossen. We have some voice recordings of prisoners, which they kept as an experiment. And those are amazing. There is this man who wails, Mal Singh. He says, I come from Hindustan. I used to have ghee over there. I used to have 1 seer of milk. I want to main Hindustan jayega, he says. And you just feel this young man. I hope he makes it. And just before I left, somebody had traced some record because I've been interested in Mal Singh. Right. And he came to me and he said, yes, Mal Singh, he found it in some place that he died.
So these are one of the few audio recordings of
prisoners of war in Germany, in Zossen, in Germany. So they were kept over there. And it's amazing. You actually hear the voices. You hear the desperation and how much they're missing home. Right. Germany was even worse. They didn't understand the language. At least the English, they'd follow something. And the English officers always spoke Hindustani. That was a rule. So they understood each other.
Right.
Germany was nothing.
Tell me about, there are two people that I want to, we have 5 minutes left, and focus on the life stories of, one of course is Gaffar Singh, Victoria Cross winner from Uttarakhand. And the other Sukha, a Dalit cook, Dalit cleaner, who dies also in, I think, 1915. Tell us about Gaffar Singh and his life story and his wife's dedication to his memory.
So Gaffar Singh, I followed his story. I went to his village in Chamba. He left for the war at 22. He died in the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle, and at 22. He was married. His wife, his child bride, was 13-year-old Saturi. And when I went back, the family told me that Saturi never remarried. Saturi used to wear, she couldn't even read the inscription on the Victoria Cross. She was illiterate. But she used to wear, she was so proud of it. She would wear the Victoria Cross pinned on her sari all her life. And she would go to collect firewood, because it's a very simple, family in Garhwal. She would collect firewood wearing that, and everyone would stand up and salute her because they were saluting the Victoria Cross.
And at the other end of the spectrum, Sukha, this very sad story of...
Sukha, I found his story in the hospital files that I studied in the British Library, and it's moving because Sukha was a cleaner, came from Bareilly, signed up for the war, and he fell ill. He's brought to hospital in England, he dies there. But that's when the tragedy begins, because the Hindus say, he's not a Hindu, we are not going to cremate him. He's taken to the Muslims say, he's not a Muslim.
So because he's a Dalit, they're saying we will not let him
he was an untouchable,
be cremated along with us.
So they won't bury him, the Muslims won't bury him, the Hindus won't touch him, and Sukha is lying in no man's land till, rejected by his own countrymen, till the vicar of the local church comes forward and says, Sukha died for England, I will bury him. And so Sukha is buried in a beautiful grave in a church in a very pretty part of the English countryside. And he has the largest headstone in that graveyard because the parishioners all contributed to his grave. So it's one of the...
And I actually want to read...
There's a picture of his grave in the book. And I hope people go and see this part of...
we'll have to...
It's wonderful to have, somebody like Sukha, a man with no name, no face. He doesn't even have a second name. He's called Sukha Kallu because he's probably dark.
Right. And I want to read this for the benefit of our viewers.
That'd be lovely.
What it says on his tombstone.
Gravestone,
Gravestone. This stone was erected by the parishioners of Brockenhurst to mark the spot where is laid the earthly body of Sukha, a resident of Mohalla Gangapur, City Bareilly, United Provinces of India. He left country, home and friends to serve our king and empire in the Great European War as a humble servant in Lady Hardinge Hospital for wounded Indian soldiers in this parish. He departed this life on January 12th, 1915, aged 30 years. By creed, he was not Christian, but his earthly life was sacrificed in the interests of others. And then there's a small quote from Ephesians, there is one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Moving epitaph in a way, but in depth encapsulating the harsh reality of Indian society.
True. And also that everything is in black and white, The English weren't all bad and they buried Sukha at the end of the day. So I think it's one of those human stories that come out of this war. And those are the things that we can take away with us.
And unlike the better-known victims of this war or the better-known heroes of this war, it would be impossible to trace out the family of Sukha.
Absolutely.
No records exist of his...
I found his he came with the Supply and Transport Corps. We know his home city. We know his age. That's about it. Yeah, just very little about him.
Right. One of my connections or memories of the Indian role, in 1998, I had a chance to visit the Imperial War Graves in Basra. It's a different battlefront, of course. But while we were there, the Indian ambassador went there, and I went along with him. And the caretaker came out with these gunny sacks full of these printed volumes. And going through those records and the experience you had looking at the names, sometimes, quite often just one name. Remote village, you are struck by the enormous sacrifice that Indians across the country of all castes and creeds made for what was ultimately, of course, a war for king and another country. Shrabani Basu, we will have to end it there. We're completely out of time, but You've written a wonderful book. I think
you.
it should be read by everybody who is interested in military history. Thank you very much for joining us
Thank
on
you.
Rajya Sabha TV.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, this wraps up this episode of Indian Standard Time. Do join us again next week with another guest. Thank you for watching.